Hello and welcome to Sisters of Thunder podcast number 5. And I am Kathy Baldock.
And I'm Yvette Schneider.
And today we're going to start going into a new direction. In the first podcast, we talked about each of our own backgrounds. And the next 3, please don't miss them. Go back, they're in the archives, and listen to Yvette's time inside of Family Research Council and also inside of Exodus. And today we're going to start talking about trans issues. We think it'll go at least, for this section, at least 2 podcasts. But we're going to start today because just as marriage equality hit, as to be expected, the Family Research Council put out an issue analysis paper. Now, this is the kind of thing you used to work on, right, Yvette?
Right. I wrote a paper called The Gay Gene Going, Gone. It was very popular, even though you laugh.
Sorry.
But you know how you look at these policy papers and you look and see 100 footnotes, which seems to lend legitimacy to the papers that they write. I did the same sort of thing where you have a heavily footnoted paper because then it seems like you've done your research, you know what you're talking about. When I read this paper, all I saw was a bunch of cherry picking.
Right. And I am a footnote eagle-eyed person. I love to read footnotes. So as we go through this today, that's what we're going to start looking at. We're going to look at some of the things that they say. But before we do that, I want to talk about, so when the religious right and the conservative right lost their grip or could see that they were losing their grip on the gays with marriage equality, they started focusing pretty heavily. When DOMA actually collapsed, they started putting their focuses on the transgender community. And last year, when I went to the Southern Baptist Conference, and it was called the Ethics and Religious Liberties Conference, well, they should have just called it 3 days of gay all day with some trans on the side. It wasn't about really their ethics and religious liberties. It was about religious liberties, but I just thought, isn't this strange? This entire conference is dedicated to ethics, and we're going to talk about gays when really, statistically, the number one problem within the pastorate is pornography, their own, right? But that's not what we talked about. We talked about gays. And Denny Burke, a professor at one of their universities and also a fairly outspoken person, and there's another one, Owen Strachan, they created some policy papers on the transgender community, which the Southern Baptists passed. And I was determined to go and listen to the presentation of his, if we could see, air quotes, research, information that led to the policy that he presented to the Southern Baptists. So I purposefully went in a couple of minutes late after he had started, and he was already at the podium. And nobody likes to sit in the front row except me. So I look at footnotes and I sit in the front row. And I brought my poker face with me, which really isn't very good because I don't play poker even with a poker face. And I sat in the front row, in the center, as straight as I could sit up, with my arms crossed and intently focused on him as he read his findings about transgender people, and thinking, one day, Denny Burke, you will so regret the words you are speaking and damaging millions of people and their families. And an interesting thing, actually, as the sidebar happened after that, people were standing around and asking him all sorts of questions. This was Baptist pastors and leaders and some wives. And they were crowded around him asking their most poignant questions. And one woman wanted to ask a question, and I was standing just listening. And I just said hello to her. We agreed hello. And she said, I just want to ask him where I'm supposed to send my child who came out as my adult child who came out as transgender. Where should I tell my child to go to church now that my child has come out as trans? And I said, well, maybe I can help you because I know I know lots of churches. So she said, well, my son came out as a daughter, as a trans woman, and she now lives in Atlanta. So I was very helpful and sent her to my friends Randy Morgan and Johnny Layton, the pastors at New Covenant Church, where I'll actually be speaking this weekend in Atlanta, because I said, well, they're an affirming church. They're going to affirm your daughter. And she said, well, that's exactly what I want. So, so I used Denny Burke's speech as my, drawing the fly to the light, so I could get something done. But so this paper put out by FRC. It was published, I think, right after marriage equality. It was published in June on a Friday night. And so a couple of people linked to it, and by Saturday morning, I looked at it, and people were starting to send it to me. And I happened to, at that weekend, have had my board member and author of Transparently, Lisa Salazar, was staying with me for a few days. So she's a trans woman, and she read this paper, and she just kept saying, Kathy, I just can't. I can't respond. It's too ignorant. It's too offensive. I can't. So I said, how about you just sit with me while I respond, and we make sure that we get the language right together, and I hit all the points that are most offensive to you. So Lisa Salazar and I put together my response to FRC's understanding and responding to the transgender movement. So on my website, which I will link with this, not only the FRC paper, but my response to this paper, which is called Family Research Council Deceives to Support Their Anti-Transgender Policies. So, Yvette, you want to start telling us what this paper is about?
So this paper, it starts with the supposition that people are created, male or female, and that it's an undisputed reality, which that alone set me off.
Right.
That's the way it even starts. Like, some of these suppositions are just based purely on opinion and nothing else. And that's one of them. That's how the paper starts out. That's not even how the Bible starts.
So we know, and also linked, and I'll put that link in there too. I've published in my book, Walking the Bridgeless Canyon, I have a chapter on sex, gender, and sexual orientation. And I will also, in the links to this, in the docs that go along with this podcast, I will link the free chapter, the 78-minute chapter I've produced on sex, gender, and sexual orientation. And you can see immediately by listening to that, the opening conversation I have is that there are intersex people. And depending on the statistics you use, between 1 and 500 and 1 and 2,000 babies are intersex. So it is not a foregone conclusion that people are either male or female, and that is it.
Well, I did some research on intersex, and to find research that is current is practically impossible. And when I went to an intersex advocacy page to see what they had to say, they said, just talking about what constitutes intersex is so controversial that even advocates can't agree on what the definition is. So to conclusively say, yes, we know exactly what intersex is, and it's very rare, and no one who's transgender is intersex, it couldn't be more off base.
Right. So they start. So one of the things they start. So they start with that.
Well, this is what also this. I mean, this is still we're talking about. Okay, the first paragraph is one sentence.
This is going to be a long podcast. This is a 47-page paper,
and I'm going to pick it apart sentence by sentence. Well, we were laughing earlier because this is the very first sentence. The very first sentence. In recent decades, there has been an assault on the sexes. That's it. So, and then there's a 1. So that means there's a footnote. So we flip back to see what the footnote is.
And the footnote is from a book in 1977 called The Assault on the Sexes. So, of course, I went to Amazon, because this is candy to me. So
Absolutely.
I go to Amazon, and the book, The Assault on the Sexes, is not about transgender people, or they would have called them transsexuals, actually, at the time. It's a book on feminism. So they start their paper telling us that there's an assault on the sexes, and we're supposed to assume that this is a well-known, an author wrote this, but when we see it's about from 1977, and it's actually the assault on the sexes is feminists.
Right. talking about pigeonholing people, right? And forcing men to be one way and women to be another way, which I think is hilarious because that's exactly what the conservative movement does.
Yes.
Where to be a man, you need to be masculine and aggressive, and your leadership of the family needs to be unquestioned. And if you're a woman, you need to be feminine and demure. You need to sublimate your own desires for that of your husband and family. And then to turn around and say, okay, well, the assault on the sexes is really these transgenders who are coming. And
just amazing. So the other part, they do make assumptions. They keep making assumptions. They say in this paper, if individuals are unhappy because they want to be the sex that they were not born. So that's a horrible misrepresentation. People are not unhappy. I mean, it comes from a lot more than that. This dysphoria, which is the opposite of euphoria, comes from this struggle that your body does not match what your brain is, which is basically what...
Yeah, that's a lot different than me saying, gosh, there's so much white male privilege in this country. I wish I had been born a man.
So they
not the same thing.
And they call it, they correctly, in the first page, represent the term as gender dysphoria, which was changed, I think, in May of 2014 from gender identity disorder. But throughout this paper, they keep using gender identity disorder, or GID, because it's a very dismissive term.
Because they know that it's offensive. Mm-hmm. So instead of just saying, and that brings up a point, which is why we would always use the term gay lifestyle. We knew people didn't like that term. So what better reason to use it? Because you know you're going to annoy and offend.
That is so not Jesus-like.
That is so, and throughout this paper, not only did they use gender identity disorder instead of gender dysphoria, knowing that it would be offensive, because of course you want to call something a disorder.
Yes.
You don't want to call it a dysphoria. Mm-hmm. You have to make it sound more offensive than it is. And it's not even what it's called.
No.
So you're using a name that the American Psychiatric Association doesn't even use. Throughout the paper, they talk about people being mentally disordered when it's not a mental disorder.
No.
The American Psychiatric Association said that it's not a mental disorder. People who are transgender are not mentally ill, but the assumption in this paper is that they are.
And so one of the reasons that the American Psychiatric Association still has a medical association, a medical name for it, is so that transgender people can still access health insurance, so they can still get covered for some of the dysphoria that does arise from having your brain and your body not match. So they wanted to leave a designation in their standards manual, but they changed it from something that was so dismissive of calling it a disorder to calling it dysphoria. So FRC, Family Research Council, in very subtle ways, to some other people.
Well,
not so subtle to us.
And the other way I found, I'm sure Lisa found this just as offensive, was using the term transgendered as a noun when
You're
it's an adjective.
transgendered.
It's the transgendered.
Yeah.
Or what was the sentence that I saw? But throughout they would use transgendered as a noun instead of as an adjective. So you would say transgendered instead of trans people, transgender woman.
It's always, and that's
man.
just a point of etiquette. You always say trans woman, trans man, trans identity, transgender community. It is an adjective.
And if you're going to write a policy paper like this, then look it up in the dictionary, because you look it up in the dictionary and it says transgender/transgendered adjective.
Right.
And then it gives the definition.
Right. So let's move on to the first. Do you want to go to the first? Should we go to the first part of this paper, or the authors of this paper? Actually, one you used to work with, right?
No, I didn't work with anyone on here.
Oh, you didn't.
I was gone by the time. Peter Spriggs came right after I left.
So the way this paper is divided It's divided into first, and they even tell us that it's going to be divided into two pieces. First, we're going to talk about the science of transgender people, and second, we're going to talk about the policies associated with it. So the first part they have is written by a woman named, we don't know. The wonderful thing about this is it's a person named Dale O'Leary, which is an androgynous name, and that would somewhat, in this realm, also lend this paper some credibility, because we're assuming it's written by a man. So I, of course, went and tried to research Dale O'Leary, and I got very little information, but what I did get is she may be in her 70s. She's very active in the Catholic movement. She does a lot within the Catholic movement of women's roles, abortion, etc. She, as far as I could tell, she is a for-hire journalist. She does journal essays for people, and she graduated from Smith College, very good college, in 1961, and also, as far as I can tell, has had no further education on science or biology or transgender issues. And I can tell you, okay, I'm not a scientist either, but I've done a lot of research, and this person, Miss O'Leary, is flat out wrong on a lot of the science she presents, and she's supposed to be the science expert on this paper. So
not only is the science wrong, the studies that they're citing in here are coming from the 70s. One was from 1965. That was the year I was born. This is hard, and because transgender issues have come to the forefront lately, more and more people are doing studies on them. Right. You have studies that you can look at that are within the last 10 years. You don't have to go to something 50 years ago, but it's just a matter of finding something that's going to support your thesis.
So when they talk even here about their successes, that somebody had left, a young man had left his transgender identity behind after getting some counseling and had decided not to move on and transition, the person they use is a 17-year-old. So first of all, I've raised teenagers. A 17-year-old, I'm not saying all, but is not exactly firm in what they believe and know to be the realities of life yet. And also, they have this one example of a 17-year-old from 1980.
From 1979. It's an article from 1979 in the archives of general psychiatry. So this is what they came up with.
Yeah.
One person from... The article was in 1979, so obviously it was in the 70s sometimes, but before 1979. And... But they do also reference two other cases. We don't know much about them. In this and two other cases of biological males reported in the article, treatment was directed specifically at the client's gender identity through what they call motor training. So what is motor training? Teaching more masculine ways of sitting, standing, and walking, followed by training in masculine, quote, social behaviors and vocal characteristics. Treatment then moved on to addressing sexual fantasies and patterns of sexual arousal.
Wow.
This is exactly reparative therapy. This is the kind of stuff Narth was doing. This is the kind of stuff Exodus, Restored Hope Network. You just need to act more like a man. You need to act more like a woman.
Well, I've heard funny stories from the late 70s from my friends who were in reparative therapy or conversion therapy in the early, some of the early ministries associated with Exodus, and they would honestly. And it's in some videos, too. One Nation Under God, the video
right.
that Michael Bussey is in. And you can see some video documentary where they were trying to teach the women to put makeup on. They were trying to teach the men to throw footballs and work on car engines. And it should have been just like exactly the opposite
I'll tell
way.
you what, every single woman that came to Exodus conferences who said, okay, I'm not going to be a lesbian anymore, the first thing they did, paint their fingernails. Because, all women have flaming red or purple nails or blue nails.
So that's
What?
behavior modification.
Oh, Kathy, you need to paint your fingernails. I see.
My toes.
So
toes
do
are
I.
done. Yeah.
Yes, my toes are done. So I guess we're okay.
So the interesting thing about the timing of even this study that they're using is, I think we covered it in number 6 of our podcast, where we were talking about how long we have even understood that there are LGBT youth. So the first studies that were done on LGBT youth were in the early 80s. And the guy that did the studies, Ramaldi, I think that's his name, Ruffamaldi, he did these studies of gay youth in the late 70s and 80s, and nobody had an awareness that there were regular kids growing up in regular, normal homes, healthy homes that just happened to grow up and be gay. The association during this time was gay youth were troubled youth, because the first studies were done on runaways, drug addicts, street prostitutes, and only 16 of them. So you have to think, even this study they're reaching back to in 1979 was done in the same period where we didn't even know that there were gay kids around. These are not, these are not academic.
These are not representative of what's happening today at all.
No.
I would see something and say, oh, wow, is that true? And then look at the footnote and, oh, it was a study from 1974. I see.
Right.
Okay. Or the experts that they quote, I'd look up and say, okay, who is this expert? And it would be someone who is a psychiatrist who's associated with NARTH.
Right.
And then the next one,
and to
another
clarify, National Association for Therapy.
for the research and therapy of homosexuality. Okay, so recently there was a case in New Jersey that was brought against Jonah, which is the Jewish group that is supposed to help people out of homosexuality. And they were sued for, what's it called when you're misrepresenting your product? Basically, that's what it is. So you're saying you can do something and you really can't do it. And Jonah, the attorneys for Jonah, wanted to bring on Joseph Nicolosi, who is one of the members of NARTH, to say, oh, but people can change. And the judge said no, because you call homosexuality a mental illness and it's not. So we're in the same boat here. These researchers, not researchers, these experts, these doctors that they're quoting, these psychiatrists they're quoting, are all members of NARTH. And so they had
same reasons, different issues.
Well, just to put something into perspective, even if we were talking about homosexuality, NARTH came up with, I'm not sure, this was like 8 years ago or something like that, where they had psychiatrists, psychologists, master's level practitioners sign a document that said they supported conversion therapy. They came up with 75 signatures. 75.
That's impressive.
They claim a membership of 1,000. Now, when you put together, and we're not even counting master's levels practitioners here. If we're talking about the American Psychiatric Association and the American Psychological Association combined, you've got about 185,000 practitioners, and they came up with 75 signatories to say that they support conversion therapy. And conversion therapy also, according to the American Psychiatric Association and Psychological Association, every other mental and medical health institution has said that not only is it ineffective, it's damaging.
Right.
And the same techniques that FRC is touting in this paper will help transgender people, transgender youth to accept the body that they were born with, are the same techniques that are used in conversion therapy.
So here they are. So they quote, FRC quotes this Dr. Mark Dilworth, he was a 2002 conference speaker for NARTH. And so see if this sounds familiar, listeners. See if this sounds familiar from what they were trying to do with gay people, even the American Psychiatric Association in the 40s and 50s. They said that gender identity disorder is because there's all these lacks and needs. So here's how we can correct it. We can encourage father-son bonding. They have to have a mother that will distance themselves a little bit further from their sons, usually about sons, right? And affirm their sons. They have to strengthen the masculine identity. They have to extinguish. They have to stop all feminine behavior and play. They need to, the parents also need to give positive encouragement for gender appropriate behavior. And they need to also encourage in their children same-sex friends, play, and activities. And these are the steps with which a parent can help their child not be transgender anymore. Now, these are the same techniques that were used in the 50s, 60s, proven to be wrong by all the medical professional organizations, revived as a phoenix out of the dust by the religious therapy, reparative therapy organizations, put to rest because we know they don't work. Exodus closes down, and then all of a sudden, up out of the ashes again come these same
It's exactly the same
for transgender people.
And it's the same if you're talking about men, and they're using the same assumptions as people like Exodus, Restored Hope, Narth used for girls. And here's female to male transsexuals usually have childhood GID again instead of gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
As little girls, many come to believe that women are weak and they would be safer and more appreciated if they were boys. That is just classic reparative therapy. And there is no footnote for that one. If you have 100 footnotes, you couldn't footnote something like that?
That's
no,
pretty
because it's completely unsubstantiated.
So remember, this is written by a journalist with no scientific background. She has absolutely no, but she's going to tell us about biology, psychiatry, and science in this section of the paper. And as Yvette pointed out, she did not footnote some of what should have been the most significant statements. So first of all, the science part completely fails. The science and biology part absolutely, utterly fail.
Well, okay. I can't just let this go because we're almost finished with this time, and I know you want to move on, and I don't.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Because this is
why we're friends.
This is the funniest one. Other studies have found that about, quote, 25% of schizophrenics experience cross-gender identification at some point in their lives.
What's the footnote?
Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
25% of...
Right.
Why are we talking about schizophrenics here?
Right.
This is kind of crazy. And I look it up,
Right.
1965.
Is that amazing?
1965. And then... the next paragraph, studies show that up to 20% of those who had surgery have some regret over their decision. And I look to see, this comes from the website of this man named Walt Heyer.
Who I've done a book review on. He wrote a book, I can't remember the book review, but if you go under my name on Amazon, I did a pointed book review. He has become their poster child. And Walt Heyer absolutely admits that it was not gender identity that he suffered. It was schizophrenia that he suffered.
Right. So you're talk about apples and oranges,
Right.
but then again, using him as your source to say 20% regret the decision. This is not a researcher. This is not an expert. This is just some
A man that needs some
guy.
help. He needs some mental health help. Yeah, he needs some help. And they drag him out. They dragged him out with Caitlyn Jenner. They dragged him out with Chaz Bono, with all kinds of, when the trans issue comes to sight, he hits all of the shows. He hits some of the shows I don't want to mention. He hits all of those shows. He's in all of the articles. So it's rather interesting.
Yeah, it's the one guy that they trot out over and over and over again.
So if there's something we really want to enforce on these studies and these policy papers and these issue papers that come out of FRC or Focus on the Family or that come out of the Southern Baptists or any other group that has a distinctly anti-transgender voice is, look at the research. Look at the footnotes. Look at the date of those footnotes. I'm going to say that pretty much anything before the late 90s on either gay people or transgender people should be utterly dismissed.
Yeah, it's just completely outdated.
Right.
Completely outdated.
And so I was talking the other day about someone, pastor that got up and talked about the sex practices of gay people, and he used a study that was from a porn magazine, a survey from a gay porn magazine from the 1980s, and he was quoting that as if it were today. So when numbers don't line up, or you say, well, that doesn't resonate with my knowledge of my child or my brother or the person sitting next to me at church who's either LGBT or T, something should go off in your head that says, maybe I should look at the sources these people are using.
Right. And look at the doctors or the other experts that they're quoting. You can do a quick Google search and then you'll see, oh, okay, they're affiliated with NARTH, and NARTH is espousing ideas that the American Psychiatric and Psychological Associations don't agree with, that they've actually said don't work and are damaging. So you just can't read the paper without looking at, okay, where did they get this information? Because, of course, these are professionals. It's well written. It sounds convincing if you don't go and look at the sources.
And so the second part of the paper, which will be less significant, because what we should be looking at is what proof does anyone have? Because then they build the second part of the paper on the proof of the first paper. And there's no first.
Right, exactly. It's like, well, the moon is made of cheese, so therefore...
Let's have pizza. I want pizza.
And the other question I think is significant to ask, which is not addressed in this paper at all because it's not what it's about, is do Dale O'Leary or Peter Spriggs or anyone over there actually have a personal relationship with a trans person? Have they ever sat down and talked with someone one-on-one? Ever had someone over for dinner?
Right. And this is what I often say to people. They'll say, well, I know somebody. You know, the barista down at my Starbucks is gay. Oh, wow, what an unusual thing. Or my hairdresser is gay. I say, yeah, but have you ever been to their house for dinner? Have you ever had them over to dinner at your house with their children? Have you gone camping with them? Have you done relationship with people? Have you gone on vacation with them? Do you hike with them regularly, which was my thing? And the answers are never yes. They don't have relationships with LGBT people. And I was just doing an interview today, and I say, and I pound this one into the dirt, up to the skies. Relationship and education, all about it. That will absolutely change your paradigms. So you're right. These people likely have no. I mean, who would stay in relationship?
Well, they are
with someone?
painting a very grotesque picture of what and who trans people are.
Right.
It's extremely offensive.
So the second part that Peter Spriggs, is he the president, or is he just a policy?
No. He's a director of a department.
Okay, so there's Tony Perkins, but this is Peter Spriggs. He's often in the public face. But his bottom line is we should not allow the government to affirm transgender people's fake identities by allowing them to transition their native documents in terms of like their driver's licenses, their birth certificates, their passports, things that are essential for people to live. In some states you can, but they want to say, okay, those people that have gotten them their paperwork changed already, that's it. They're grandfathered in. From now on, it doesn't matter if somebody has been living as a man, born a birth woman living as a man, and they want to go get a passport, and they've been living as a man, completely look like and pass as a man. They don't want those people to have their documents changed at all, which is very shaming. And I was telling the story, I think on a podcast, about sitting in a bar with a young woman who we just ordered a beer, and she had to take out her driver's license because in her state, they didn't allow the transition of the driver's license. And sounds simple, but what an absolutely humiliating thing to have a cocktail waitress that you have no relationship with look at you with, just shame and pity and sometimes could be disdain. So that's what FRC wants to do. They want to, they lie, they misrepresent, they deceive, they use old documents, and then based on those truths, they say, this is the policy we want to set. We do not want these people to be included. We want them to have their brains deal with what their genitals say, and that's who they are. So it's interesting, and I think we could probably next week, or certainly revisit the transgender issue, because I have, for instance, we both know Lisa Salazar, and if you're looking for a book to read, transparently, Lisa wrote this book as she was transitioning. She's a Christian, and it's a good insight into how she was dealing and how long it took as a devout Christian for her to come to grips with this really was a direction she could take and stay faithful to God and stay faithful to the Word. And how dismissed I have seen people treat her, dismissively they've treated her. But it's a good book to read. It's available on Amazon. And as I said, she's like a sister to me. Caveat, she's also on my board. So I love her dearly. But transgender people, if you don't know some transgender people, you can write to me on Facebook. I know lots of transgender people who are tolerant. I've actually had, the interesting thing is, because I'm such a trans advocate within the LGBT community, and I find that a lot of the LGs and Bs in the past haven't had much interaction or information about transgender people themselves, and I would even say a bit of prejudice and bias towards the T part of the alphabet string. And they've sent me personal letters saying, Kathy, I want to be where you are. I want to be as open and kind and loving and compassionate, but I'm just not there. Can you help me? And I'll say, are you willing to be mentored? And I'll hook them up with a friend that I know will answer all their questions. And they'll come back and not too much later and they'll say, okay, I get this. So relationship and education. So the free chapter that's online on sex, gender, and orientation, the links to the assessment of this article, and this article. You know, Yvette, one thing I wanted you to bring up with, I know this is kind of out of order, but studies that are done on people. You participated in a study.
I participated in a study, I think it was in 2001. We had gone and picketed the American Psychiatric Association's convention in Chicago, saying, we exist, we ex-gays exist. Of course, most of the people who were picketing with me are no longer ex-gay, so it just goes to show you. But Robert Spitzer came out and to address us, to talk to us. We had a press conference. He just wanted to see what was going on. And he was one of the people who was instrumental in removing homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual in 1973. And he was a very studious, gentle soul. That's what I would call him. Like very quiet, introverted, and okay, if even one of you exists for real, then we need to look at, is it possible to change? So he did a study. I think there were 200 people in the study, and he called us, each of us, and I was one of the participants. So you never know who the participants are because they're not allowed to say who they are.
Well, now
but of
we
course,
know
I can say
number. And
I was one of the first people that he interviewed because I was one of the people who was picketing. And the questions to me were very interesting because, for one, okay, first of all, we're self-reporting. I can say anything I want to these questions. And I am a political activist working for a political activist organization at the time.
Your paycheck is coming from?
My paycheck is coming from this conservative, so-called pro-family institution. So what kind of answers do you think I'm going to give?
Yeah.
There's really there's no way around someone's bias in those situations. So it's not like participants were found on the street, on college campuses, where you find someone that you've never had contact with, who you don't know. No, it's Joe Nicolosi and Narth were beating the bushes, going to the ministries at Exodus saying, come and, bring us people who are going to say that they've changed.
And so we're mixing things. We're mixing trans and gay here, but they're all tied together with the fact of research, studies, what are you using, what's authentic? And, to finish that out, we've said this before. Sexual orientation is three things. It's your sexual identity, who you identify as, your sexual behavior. So if you could be gay and having heterosexual sex with your spouse in a heterosexual marriage. But the last one is your sexual attraction, which you cannot do anything with. And what the best way to test that is they take a measuring. They either put it inside a woman's vagina or they put it on the outside of a penis, and they can measure blood flow. And they show naked pictures. They show gay porn and hetero porn. And your body does not lie about what you react to. And they can also do this with eye tests, like where does your eye immediately go to before your brain can stop it? So those tests are never done. They didn't put you through that test.
No. No. And there are other things. And I think, Kathy, you and I will try to stay on top of studies that come out. And so we can address them on these podcasts and explain them, because you have to look at the number size, the length of time for longitudinal studies. There's so many intricacies that are involved for proper scientific research. But studies come out that are not replicated. Studies come out that have a clear agenda. There are so many different studies that are not just purely scientific.
And so when you have a random young gay man that I'm specifically thinking of who's saying, homosexuality is a sin, and yeah, he got caught and tripped up on Grindr, but now he's not that anymore and he's moving on to his attraction with women. Well, he's only been a public figure for 2 or 3 years. Let's go visit him 10 years from now and see depression. Let's go look at those things. Right. And there's some women that are public voices, but I know from relationships that I have with people who are intimate friends with those women, with the woman I'm thinking of particular, she is doing tons and tons of speaking engagements, but behind the scenes, she says things like, I would love to have some hot lesbian sex right now. Now, I don't say that because I'm not attracted to women. Well, supposedly she's not attracted to women either.
But Kathy, you're always so surprised when you hear these things. And I heard them all the time.
Yeah.
I heard them all the time.
Yeah.
At Exodus conferences, at Christian conferences, Focus on the Family, Love One Out conferences, all the time.
So the bottom line of this is, check out the resources, check out the research. Please become a nation, an activist nation of footnote readers. Use your Google. Go to Amazon and see what these books were written about and who wrote them. Check out the people that are quoting these studies, who they are. Do they have good reputations? Is this their field of study?
Right.
So again, the resources will be there. So we're going to hear quite a bit about the rising from the anti-transgender movement. So we're trying to supply our listeners with some, at least the ability to question the things that they are going to hear.
Can I say one more thing before we wrap up? And that is, okay, I know personally a handful of trans people. Like I don't have this huge collection of trans friends, but the ones I have, they're intelligent. They have good jobs. They're just like anyone else that I've ever talked to. Like there's really no significant difference. And this is trans women and trans men. So this was one of my favorite quotes in this study, and I just can't resist because I have to say it. So this is a quote from one of the psychiatrists affiliated with NARTH, but they don't tell you that they're affiliated with NARTH unless you look in the footnotes. And it says, the significance of the psychological difficulty, meaning the gender dysphoria, should not be minimized by a patient's seeming success socially and professionally and in other areas. So if you're well adjusted and you're functioning fine, that doesn't matter.
So they've covered all the bases. So they say, this is why you're broken, but if you're doing fine, let's forget about that because it doesn't matter. Well, we hope we've educated you a little bit, because that's what we're trying to do. In a lot of these podcasts, we have lots of experience from reading and our own personal experiences. So we're hoping to share this with you week after week. And as I said, go back to the archives, listen to the 3 before this with Yvette's time inside of the religious right. And if you want to know how she got out of it, she got out of it before she met me, so I can't take any credit for that. Read her book, Never Not Broken. It's available on Amazon, and it'll tell about her journey of cognitive dissonance and trying to get through this. And what started it was the illness of one of her children.
But Kathy did live 3 miles away from me while this whole ordeal was going on.
The whole time. And was I helpful?
You were very helpful.
No. While you were going through your ordeal, no. But that's because I didn't know you.
You didn't help me at all. Gosh.
Oh, my goodness. Let's take these as quotes. Did Kathy help you? No. It was the biggest trauma of my life, and she didn't help me. Yeah, because Kathy didn't know you. So again, thanks for joining us. We're the Sisters of Thunder. I'm Kathy Baldock.
I'm Yvette Schneider.
Bye.
Bye.